When in the midst of a bush war, one has days when you know everything is just going to turn out perfect. And we were enjoying a day like that, a stunning day. Early morning sun had just come up over the escarpment. We were in the Zambezi Valley, and we arrived at a small village to investigate a feeding incident. And the headman came running up as soon as the truck stopped, and I asked him, after I had greeted him, what the problem was there. And he said, some of our children were abducted last night. They have taken 4 young men with them. And I said, okay, just slow down a little bit. What happened? And he said, well, the Monawevu, which is the sons of the soil, as the terrorists sometimes refer to themselves as, they came here last night looking for food. And we gave them some food, and then they wanted 5 buckets of ground maize meal, which we managed to get together, and that didn't seem to satisfy them. They then changed their demand and they wanted 10. And then they selected these 4 young men to help them carry the stuff. And I said, okay, just describe them to me. Were they Shona speaking? Were they Ndebele? Did they say anything to you, where they had come from or where they were going? And so we had a bit of a conversation. And it turned out that from his perspective, these were survivors from a previous contact somewhere. And he said they were in very poor shape as regards their kit. They had no weapons with them. They were all barefoot. Their clothes were in tatters. And he said they disappeared into the night with these men that they had abducted. So we looked around for spoor. We found out where they had eaten the food. And we also looked very carefully to see if it was true that they had no weapons with them. Well, here and there we found imprints of AK butts. We counted 3 altogether. And it seemed to us that there were 8 terrorists. And now with the 4 young men that they had with them, we were on the trail of 12 individuals. And it looked good, I thought. They were all barefoot and very easy to follow. And when people carry heavy loads, they tend to take shorter steps. So it was clear that this that they had taken, the 10 buckets of mealie meal, wasn't all. There was a lot of extra weight to their loads as well, and everybody had to share. And of course their toes are splayed out. You can see it in the ground. Another indication that men were carrying heavy loads. And so I thought, well, this should be a piece of cake. We're in the Zambezi Valley. The land is very flat. And we'll certainly walk a lot quicker than they would. And so we set off, not at a run, but as I said, quite quick. And I tried to memorize the map in the ops tent, and I knew that the Mozambique border was probably about 20, maybe 25 miles away from where I was. And although they had a good start, and it was certain that they were heading for the border and back to their training camps, I thought, we could just cut them off before they get there if we move on. And so we proceeded with a follow-up. The Zambezi Valley is a beautiful place. When Columbus arrived in America, this area, this part of the Zambezi Valley was a thriving kingdom, rich in gold, and probably within walking distance of that village where we had started the follow-up was the reported capital of this Mutapa kingdom. And over to the northwest, also not very far away, was the great Musengezi River, where we had learnt in our history lessons at school how the first Catholic missionary, a Portuguese, a man by the name of da Silveira, had been murdered by the Monomotapa king. and his body thrown to the crocodiles in that river. So, you know, there's a lot of history associated with the Zambezi Valley, and it was here where the Portuguese sent an army of 1,000 men to take vengeance for the missionaries' death, and how they were decimated, not by the local people living here, but by tropical diseases, and that expedition came to nothing. And so, you know, I was aware of all this stuff going on around me, but you know, we're not supposed to be historians there. We're not anthropologists or archaeologists or anything like that. We are soldiers with a job to do, and so you've got to stay focused on what's happening. But it's easy to let your mind wander because, you know, they've got the spoor has got a rhythm, and you tune yourself into that rhythm, and you automatically know where to expect the next set of prints to be taking you. So, you know, you can do a follow-up in a pretty relaxed frame of mind. And what I loved about the Zambezi Valley was it is like a wonderful parkland with in places with wide open spaces with short grass, mopani trees, really a wonderful place. For me, I've always thought to be the most beautiful place on earth, and especially at night, sitting on the escarpment as the sun goes down and looking across that vast basin. It is the most beautiful sight in Africa. And so we continued, and I could see that we were making up time, because when they stopped to rest, they would obviously sit in the shade, and then they would move on. So if you came to a resting place, you just looked to see where the individuals had been resting, and then you looked and saw where the shadow of the tree was at the point when you arrived there. And the smaller that arc becomes, the distance between where they rested and where the shadow is, as that becomes smaller, you become aware of the fact that you're closing in on your enemy, and it's an encouraging sign. We continued like this. The day grew quite hot, but I had been told that the valley floor is the ancient bed of an inland sea, and so I could imagine being 20 meters under the water as I walked along on the seabed, and it kind of, you know, it doesn't feel quite as hot, and it just the thought of that, you know, sort of helps cool you down. We continued till about 3 o'clock that afternoon, and by this time we had walked off all the maps that I had with me. The escarpment was now very distant to the south. I could hardly make it out, and I wasn't sure where we were. I was sending in sit reps. Normally these would be given in 6-figure locations, but I now had to start using 4-figure approximations, and eventually even that I knew wasn't good enough. We weren't lost. I mean, I knew where I was, but I couldn't point to a specific place on the map. But it didn't matter, because we would find our way home. There was no problem about that. And then, for some reason, they started anti-tracking. This did surprise me, because we had been very silent. We don't make a noise when we move in the bush. We don't speak to each other. It's all done by silent signals. And I wondered what had suddenly frightened them like this. They went off in one direction, they went off in another. They bombshelled a little bit, but then they regrouped and came back together again. They tried walking backwards, of all things, as though that would fool anybody. These attempts of theirs were really futile. And then they came to a donga, which is a channel that has been eroded into the ground. And sometimes these are small little obstructions you can step across, but sometimes they are very big, and you could hide a motor car in one of them and not see it from ground level. And we came to such a donga that they had climbed into. And I looked very carefully over the edge, and I could see there was nobody there, and the tracks led off to the right. So one by one we descended into this donga, and as I say, we could stand upright and we couldn't see out of it. We walked along it for a while, and I found that there was a cutting leading to the opposite side that they had clambered up. And one of the trackers was walking in front of me, and he proceeded to climb up out of this donga, and I was immediately behind him, and the men were preparing to follow in single file. And as the tracker stood upright as he climbed out of the donga, and I was about almost out of it, I saw him stiffen, and I looked ahead and I saw movement in the trees about 150 paces in front of me, I suppose. It was a sentry in a tree. And this is the big problem when you're doing a follow-up. Your enemy doesn't know exactly when you'll be arriving, but he knows exactly where you'll be coming from. And these people had very cleverly sent somebody up into a tree to watch their trail. And they had seen the tracker emerge from the donga, and I started following him, and the men were behind me. And so the sentry opened up. And immediately I darted to the right of the tracker, and we opened fire simultaneously. And we let rip at them. I heard a rifleman on the left of me then also open up, and he got off a few shots. But then there was a lot of dust there in the vicinity of where the terrorists were, but there were no shots coming back. So very quickly, almost without stopping, we formed an extended line and proceeded to make our way into the what to us would have been the killing ground. And when we arrived at that spot, and it was very quick, we swept through there. You don't stop when you get to a place like that. You move on through it, and you look to the left and you look to your right, and if there's anybody lying there, even if they're dead, you drill them again just to make sure. You never want somebody jumping up behind you and pulling you because you assumed that they were dead. And so we went through this area till we got to the other side. We didn't find any wounded gooks or dead gooks, but on the other end I saw lots of wide spaces and big sweeping skid marks, sure signs of men in full flight, in absolute terror of their lives. And I thought, yeah, run, go for it. I don't want you dead today. I want you alive. I want you tonight to be bumbling around in the bush over here, whistling for your mates, trying to regroup, worrying when you hear an answering whistle, whether it's the soldiers or whether it is your comrades. And tomorrow, your training camp isn't far from you. I know that. I want you to sneak back there in your ones and twos, and I want you to stand before your communist masters, and I want you to wring your hands in anguish. And I want you to say, sorry, comrade Chinaman, it is not so easy to liberate a country. And I want your mates to watch you on the parade ground when they beat you. And I want them to remember how you left there, gallant freedom fighters. Ambuya Nahanda was going to help you, was going to turn you invisible, was going to turn the soldiers' bullets into water when they fired at you. You were going to come back heroes, but you've come back barefoot, hungry, in tatters, nothing to show for it. More than half of your men gone, your weapons gone. That is what I want. You live with that. And I went back, looked at the loot that they had there. Oh, of course there was tins and tins of mealie meal, and shoes in boxes, so they had robbed a store somewhere. And of all things, raincoats, yellow plastic raincoats, by the dozen. And I just said to the men, well, take what you want or what you think you can carry and burn the rest, but be quick about it because it's going to be dark soon. And when the embers had burned down and we had destroyed everything that we couldn't carry with us, we proceeded southwards in search of a road and I was hoping that the platoon lieutenant would be able to send some trucks in the morning and then take us back to camp. And it's all human nature, isn't it? Enough is never enough. If they had left those young men alone and just carried what they had, they would have got back to their camp with something to show. They would have had some raincoats, some mealie meal taken from another village, some shoes. It would have been something. But enough is never enough. And so they had nothing. They went back with nothing. And I'm happy to say that the men that had been abducted, those youths, all managed to escape during the engagement, and a few days later they pitched up back at the village, and everybody rejoiced and was happy over that. So yes, it was a good day. It turned out well, as I thought it would right from the very beginning.